Does high debt cause slow growth, or is it the other way around? What do you think?
You can definitely tell plausible stories either way. I think there's the big issue. The big issue everyone's been talking about is what the facts are, and the facts are that high debt is associated with low growth. The next question is the question you pose, which is why. But then there's also the question no one's focusing on, which is so what?
Yes,
even
indeed.
If you believe the even if you believe the Reinhart-Rogoff result, that says you want lower public debt. But in the United States, would we do better by working to expand the economy than by having a fiscal contraction? So there's a line of thinking that says the most expensive thing you can do, and the thing most likely to raise the national debt, is to have a generation who never work again. They don't pay taxes and they end up on the welfare state. And so perhaps it's possible, in fact, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers has suggested this, it's possible that if you have a fiscal expansion, ironically enough, that could end up being the thing that reduces the debt.
Justin, are you in Larry Summers' camp then? Are you in the group of economists that points to low inflation, that points to record low bond yields and says this is the time the government should be borrowing, not cutting expenses?
Well, I do think a very important way to see whether government debt is a problem is to look at whether people are willing to lend to the government. And right now the world is queuing up to lend to us, and in fact, in real terms, they're paying us money to borrow from them. The other side of this argument, though, is what's the most important thing thinking about our fiscal future? And for my money, and I am convinced on this, getting people back to work is the simplest way of getting back to paying taxes, and that actually is the really overlooked part of this debate.
Justin, Pollan and Ash, the UMass and Amherst researchers, the professors who are kind of disputing Rogoff and Reinhart's findings, wrote in the New York Times that history suggests that there is some threshold beyond which piling on public debt definitively yields lower economic growth. But there is no consensus on what that threshold is, whether it's 90% or otherwise. The evidence suggests, in any event, that the United States and Europe are not anywhere close to it. Nowhere close to it, but the trend line here is what's concerning. At some point, someone's got to pay.
I read that, and I was a little puzzled by their comment. I mean, the observation here has got to be simple, which is borrowing to do smart, productive things that's going to increase your ability to repay debt is always a good idea, and borrowing to do dumb things that aren't going to grow the economy and are going to saddle future generations with more debt is a bad idea. It's not even clear there's a threshold. The threshold is, are we investing in smart things that are going to help the economy grow?
Justin, you mentioned a couple of moments ago that you do believe that getting people back to work ultimately is the best way to solve this fiscal conundrum, and presumably we would need to borrow some money in order to create jobs that would put those people back to work, and that we can borrow at these low rates because people are lining up to lend us money. Are people lining up to lend us money, though? Where would interest rates be without the Federal Reserve? Is it fair for Keynesians, and I'm not accusing you of being a Keynesian, but to point to record low bond yields when we don't know where bond yields would be? We can guess without the distortive influence of the Federal Reserve and the ECB and the Bank of Japan and the BOE, etc.
Mate, you can call me a Keynesian, you can call me an Australian, you can call me whatever you like. You're right to say short-term interest rates are definitely affected by the Fed. So let's not talk about that. Let's talk about long-term interest rates. Let's talk about 10-year bonds. Let's talk about 30-year bonds. And even when you look over those durations, which is where market forces are definitely acting, the world is not only queuing up to lend us money today, they're queuing up to lend us money for a generation. So this is markets saying they don't think US government debt is a risk today. They also don't think it will be next decade or the decade after.